As many longtime viewers of mine should know, I once did a top 15 starters list with my friend Lee. Over 2 years since that list's upload, and to be quite frank, it hasn't held up that well. We judged Pokemon based on anime and not manga, we were picking out who we talked about competitively, and we made some seriously questionable statements. But that was 2 years ago, and I think we developed more of an understanding of how these lists should play out. And if either one of us were to make another starters list, we'd actually know what to talk about. But most importantly, we wouldn't be this guy.
One of the hardest decisions when playing a Pokemon game is, of course, picking your starter.
Actually, it's making sure your face is as far away from the camera as physically possible. Seriously, that shit scared me the first time I saw this video.
Water type, grass type, or fire type. For whatever the reason.
Nope, we're not looking at that again. Let's go to number 5.
One of the worst generations starter-wise was definitely Gen 5. Black and White gave us Oshawott, Snivy, and Tepig. None of them were anywhere near as good as the previous generation starters, especially in battle, but one in particular was just useless in every way, and that would be Tepig. Yep, it was another firefighting type, the third one in a row to be exact. But did it improve over the previous two? Nope.
You know, apart from having the highest HP and attack stats of all non-Mega Evolved starters.
In fact, it was very slow in battle, making it outclassed by Blaziken and Infernape.
To be fair, Blaziken's only high tier because of speed boost. Otherwise, its speed stat would be mediocre at best. Besides, Emboar's role is as a tank, not as a sweeper like Blaziken and Infernape. You can argue that it's not incredible as a tank, but don't try and tell me that a Pokemon not designed as a sweeper is not as good in that role as a Pokemon who was designed as a sweeper. Otherwise, they're comparing apples and oranges.
Competitively, no one is going to use Emboar over Blaziken and Infernape, making this starter completely useless.
Even if Blaziken and Infernape are better, they're not starters available within Unova. Your argument might have held more ground if they were obtainable within the Gen 5 games, or if Oshawott and or Snivy gave Tepig no reason to be used, but neither are the case. Is Tepig useful in-game?
It was the first starter that I chose in Black and White, and while it was pretty decent for the story mode,
useless in every way.
Well, it's official. Pokemon have to be competitively viable to be worth a damn. Hey, wait a second. Aren't Samurai and Torterra in lower tiers than Emboar? Why aren't they on here if Emboar's here for not being as competitively good as other Pokemon?
out of the Generation 4 starters, I would have to consider one of the worst in the bunch to be Piplup, mainly because of its final evolution, Empoleon, a steel water-type Pokemon. Not only is it weak against electric types,
oh, you mean like literally every water starter that isn't Swampert?
Ground types and fighting types as well. And guess what the secondary types of the other two starters are? However, Empoleon does have a bit of a better edge now that fairy type's been introduced. But for the generation that it started in, Piplup was at a huge disadvantage, and anyone that picked it had very little of a fighting chance against the other two starters in battle. Yep, even Infernape, which it was supposed to have the advantage over.
One, Empoleon still has a type advantage over Infernape. Last time I checked, water still puts out fire. And against Torterra? Come on, it's a grass starter. It's basically obliged to be Empoleon by type alone. Though even then, Empoleon can learn Ice Beam. 2. Empoleon being weak to Infernape's and Torterra's typings is the only thing you brought up to put it on the list. Yet Infernape is also weak to both Empoleon's water typing and Torterra's ground typing. Why does Infernape get a pass when your critique applies just as much to Infernape as it does to Empoleon? Even if you want to bring up tiers, that should only mean that Infernape is not as high as Empoleon on the list, but still on the list. Speaking of tiers, 3. Empoleon's in the underused tier. If you're going to get an Emboar's case because other stars are better competitively, why is a Pokemon who's competitively ranked higher one spot above Emboar? And while we're at it, why aren't all the stars ranked never used on the list since they're all competitively lower?
Once again, we're going back to take another look at another 5th generation starter. When these starters were first announced, many of us thought the best looking of the starters was Snivy, only to find out how horrible it was in battle.
Okay, so instead of the NU ranked Unova starter, you're willing to put the OU ranked Unova starter on the list. I understand that the reason why Superior is higher tier is because of its hidden ability, which you can't even get in Gen 5 when it's a starter, but you're willing to put Emboar on the list because it's not as competitively viable as other fire stars, including a fire star who's only viable because of its own hidden ability. Oh, did I forget to mention that said fire starter is located within a region that has been criticized for having quote-unquote Too much water?
Its offensive move pool and stats are just bad.
Yes, a base 113 speed stat is bad. By the way, remember when you tried arguing that Emboar sucked because it lacked speed? Yet here a Pokemon is, with higher speed than both Blaziken and Infernape, but it's on the list as opposed to those two and higher on the list than Emboar.
You have to use something like Leech Seed to even make it usable. At least Oshawott and Tepig, though not great, are still usable. They can defeat other Pokemon and get you through the game pretty quickly, but not Snivy. You have to Coil, Leech Seed, Leaf Blade, rinse and repeat every single battle, which took a lot longer and got pretty boring after a while.
Maybe it's because its stats are more focused on speed and defense rather than attack, but even then, I never had to rely on a strategy like that when using Snivy as my starter. Even though Superior has the lowest combined attack stats of all starters, that's not saying a lot since Pokemon is pretty easy regardless of starter, assuming you know what you're doing, which, given your previous entries, I kind of question with you.
Chikorita is known by many fans as one of the worst starters ever, simply because it's pretty useless throughout the entire game of Gold and Silver. First gym is Flying type, and Chikorita is weak to Flying type, so it can't help you there. Then the second gym, which is a Bug type, and Chikorita just gets beaten once again. Then Whitney gives all the starters trouble. After that comes the Ghost type gym, and Chikorita doesn't do very well in that either. Fifth gym is a Fighting type gym, and the gym leader uses a Poliwrath, which you'd think a Grass type would have an advantage against. But by this point in the game, you probably already have other members on your team that are stronger than your Bayleaf because of how little you end up using it throughout the game. Steel gym, it's not very helpful. Ice gym, it gets destroyed again. And the Dragon gym, it's not much help there either.
Let's go through this one at a time. Against Falkner, Chikorita gets Poison Powder at level 9, and Pidgey has no damaging flying moves. That said, you can catch Geodude, Ghastly, or Mareep, no problem. These three are also effective over Scyther, the only Pokemon on Bugsy's team to give you a hard time. Like, seriously? Metapod? Only tackle? That said, Bayleaf gets Reflect at level 18, which can really help against Scyther, as well as Whitney's Miltank. Morty can be completely countered by the Togepi egg you get early on. Granted, it's not just useful for Chikorita, but that doesn't mean it's not useful at all. You're dismissing its usefulness against Chuck because he might have something else. Jasmine can't do much against Meganium with Magnemite, and Steelix does not resist Grass Stab thanks to its ground typing. However, you will have something with Surf, as it's required to get the medicine that's needed to face her in the first place. All of Price's Pokemon are weak to Grass, in spite of the fact that he's an Ice-type gym leader. And against Claire, it's not too shabby. Its stab is not resisted by Kingdra or Gyarados, and the only thing it really fears is one of the Dragonair's Fire Blast. Not useful, my ass!
But what about the attacks it can learn? Well, they're not great either.
Reflect has physical damage, Poison Powder does what you'd expect, magically fits regardless. Something tells me you're judging the Grass Stars based on strength alone.
Chikorita has no advantage in any of the gyms, unless you want to count Poliwrath.
You know, using your logic, what about Totodile? Like Chikorita, there's no Johto gym leader with a type weak to water, and the two gym leader Pokemon it does have a natural advantage over, Jasmine, Steelix, and Price's Piloswine. Typhlosion has a type advantage over as well. Now granted, thanks to learning Bite and Ice Fang via level up, it's arguably the best starter against Morty and Claire. But for Morty, I refer to Togepi. For Claire, before then, you're forced to fight a wild shiny Gyarados, a water type with a similar stat composition to Feraligatr. So for the two gyms where it's better than the other starters, the game practically gives you an option that's just as viable, if not better. I mean, if we're willing to put Chikorita on the list for apparently being shitty in Johto, why give Totodile a pass when it's arguably just as shitty and probably even easier to replace?
And now, the #1 worst starter Pokemon of all time is Pikachu from Pokemon Yellow.
This is totally a cop-out. Brandon, you said this at the beginning.
From generation to generation, we've always had to pick one of 3 starter Pokemon in the beginning of the game, whether it be a water type, grass type, or fire type.
Apart from the fact that it's electric and not fire, water, or grass, it's the only starter choice of Yellow, and in any other game it's in, you can get them like crazy and not have to rely on something like breeding or defensive art to obtain more. Hell, in the context of the game's story, it wasn't even your intended starter. Your next line supports that claim.
Right from the beginning of the game, Oak gives you a Pokemon that he literally just caught fresh from the wild.
After which, Professor Oak takes you back to his lab to obtain the starter he wanted you to have in the first place. But then your rival acts like a greedy whore and fuck you, Mitt Romney! At which point, Oak gives you the one Pokemon he had left on hand. Pikachu.
It was literally useless in the first gym, so you had to catch a Caterpie or a Metapod and make it evolve into Butterfree to have a chance against defeating Brock.
Tell that to Charmander. In Red and Blue, it didn't have the luxury of Nidorans or Mankey, and if it was Blue version, you'd have to rely on Beedrill instead of Butterfree. That said, Brock in Gen 1 didn't have any rock-type attacks, just Bite and Tackle, and if you could stall out Bite with Brawl or Tail Whip, the battle becomes much easier. Sure, this knowledge makes it easier to beat Brock with Charmander, but this is just as applicable to Pikachu. Gen 3 on the other hand, well...
It's okay for the second gym, but by then you get a Bulbasaur, so if you train that, Pikachu becomes unneeded.
If you train Bulbasaur from level 10, sure, but here's the catch. You can only get Bulbasaur if Pikachu's happiness is high enough. Wanna know an easy way to increase that happiness stat? Leveling up. Potentially up to a point where it can beat Misty itself. Going back to Charmander, it doesn't have this type advantage. And if you didn't catch a Pikachu or Parasite before arriving in Cerulean City, your best bet was catching a Oddish or Bellsprout, depending on the version. Or maybe Magikarp and training that.
Then for the third gym, catching a Diglett or Dugtrio is like an easy win for that.
Applies to everyone, not just Pikachu and not excluding Charmander.
But what's probably the worst aspect of it is that you can't evolve your Pikachu, simply because the game is trying to be like the anime, where Pikachu refuses to evolve. Pikachu's all like,
I ain't doing that.
I like it better than Raichu anyways.
So your best bet is to either put it in the PC box or just release it, and pick up a Jolteon instead, cause you're gonna need it.
I've been playing Pokemon Yellow for over 15 years now. I've played it over and over and over, had many different teams, tried many different strategies, but never once have I used Jolteon on a main team. So no, I'm not gonna need it. But don't take my word for it. Just look at Maryland, Brain Scratch comms, Psycho Plays, Paradox comms. I was in that, wink wink nudge nudge. And most people's playthroughs of Pokemon Yellow, the majority of whom had Pikachu participate in the final battle against their rivals. By the way, that whole storing in the PC shit? That shit decreases your Pikachu's friendship, meaning that doing so deliberately decreases the chances of getting a Bulbasaur. Even if I wanted an electric type other than Pikachu, Jolteon isn't even available until about when I challenge Erica, by which point the electric type means very little altogether. I might as well wait until the power plant so I can get a Magneton, Electrode, or God forbid I use legendaries, Zapdos. And once again, the same can be said of Charmander, who arguably still had it worse. You get an Eevee around the time of Erica, it can become Flareon right away, and it can sweep the one gym leader the Charmander line had a type advantage over. And with a higher attack and special stat, it gives the Charmander line ultimately little reason to be used in comparison.
Those are just my opinions on which of the starter Pokemon I think are the worst. I know that many of you might get upset because your favorite is on the list, but just remember that everyone has different choices over which is the best and which is the worst.
My problem with their list wasn't your opinions, except for maybe Pikachu being on the list because it's a cop-out, but I digress. It was your reasons. They were based on unfair comparisons, petty, inconsistent, over-exaggerated, and hypocritical. A lot of these are problems that most likely existed in that starters list I was in 2 years ago, yet somehow they were worse here. It just goes to show, those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it, even if it's not their past they're repeating. Final thoughts? Though my opinions on the stars have changed since that list, and I feel much more positive about the stars that rank lower, I still find Totodile to be my least favorite starter, because fucking Shiny Gyarados, man!